Hey guys, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today I'm asking the question, do you have trouble understanding President Trump's speech patterns? And if you do, we now have a helper to basically help you understand, and that is artificial intelligence. Now, I think this is actually very interesting and amusing, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. I don't care if you love the guy or hate the guy. This is actually really fascinating. Now, if you have ever read a transcript of the president giving an unscripted talk or speech, it's rather interesting, and I've actually done this, and I recommend that everybody does this. Now, he has a tendency to pivot quickly or change the subject or just go to another point in his talk and then pivot back to the original point or simply move on to something else. He does this very naturally. This is his normal way of speaking and delivering information. And so whether you're just watching him talk or hearing him speak, he's very natural at doing this. But if you read those words, as I mentioned, you'll see why there are linguists out there scratching their heads and trying to quantify this pattern. But since we're not all linguists, we now have a helper that can actually decipher this for us, and that would be Margaret. She's an artificial intelligence, and her story and conclusions are rather interesting. Now, Margaret is named for a character on the TV series West Wing who apparently could forge the president's signature, and we will get to that. Not the West Wing, but forging the president's signature, if you will. Her creator is Bill Frischling, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and his moment of inspiration came about 3 years ago when Margaret, his artificial intelligence bot, tried to transcribe a 127-word section of a speech by President Trump. Now, President Trump was commemorating a World War II battle, and his speech, quote-unquote, careened wildly, according to the LA Times, where I'm getting a lot of this information from. And according to Frischling, and I quote, according to the LA Times, I quote, Trump shifted verb tenses and subjects without warning. Syntax was tortured and conclusions collided. He added subclause to subclause, parenthetical to parenthetical, preposition to preposition. And so by the time that Trump in this 127-word section mentioned winning for the fourth time, Margaret, the AI, actually crashed. And so Frischling recalled, and I quote, it was still trying to punctuate like it was English versus trying to punctuate it like it was Trump. Trump is much more staccato than I think the natural flow of the written English word. So Frischling rebooted, and then he hired a computer expert with a PhD in machine punctuation to unteach Margaret normal grammar and syntax and teach Margaret to decipher Trump speak instead. Now, Margaret better understands Trump's speech patterns and, more importantly, better understands Trump in terms of his tics, his tells, his tendencies, and his habits than probably most of us on the planet do. Margaret can assess when Trump is stressed, measure his calm, and even mimic what Trump might say and in public before he actually does. And apparently she has run predictive speeches that are fairly accurate. Margaret also has a pretty good sense of when Trump is angry versus when he is just putting on a show. After all, he is a bit of a showman, as you probably are aware. Now, to form these conclusions, Margaret keeps track of Trump's pauses, hand gestures, rate of speech, the types of adjectives he uses, deviations from his usual vocabulary, and the tone in his voice, among another whole bunch of set of factors. Margaret also has digested more than 11 million words of Trump's speeches, his tweets, books, rallies, videos, and radio interviews, as well as TV clips dating back to 1976, when Trump wrote his first published letter to the New York Times. Now, at some level, Margaret finds Trump predictable. This is according to LA Times, and I quote, he almost always speaks faster, about 220 words per minute when he is off script, far faster than the national average of about 110 to 150 words per minute. And unlike most people who slow down and stammer or get uncomfortable when they're about to say something false, according to the LA Times, Trump speeds up, according to Margaret, using filler phrases to get himself going, such as, first of all, or they're talking, and then he, and I quote, as he races towards cruising velocity, which Frischling calls his salesman mode. Now, I think this is really fascinating, and I do have to say that, just in my own thoughts here, I wonder how this would compare to former presidents. I would love to see a comparison of speech patterns from President Trump to President Obama to W to HW to Clinton and on and on. We have a ton of footage, ever since TV and radio came about of, former presidents, and I would love to see, just that kind of comparison. Oftentimes, we've seen comparisons to say, the president is speaking in a speech at, the third grade level, the eighth grade level, whatever, but a speech pattern is, I think, a kind of different thing. Now, this also opens up a new realm for deepfake accuracy, which I think is very concerning, not just to cybersecurity professionals, but also those in the intel business as well. It's very possible that something like a Russian troll farm, for example, could develop their own AI in this vein, make predictions on a person's vocabulary or a candidate's vocabulary, such as, let's say, Vice President Biden, who is a presumptive nominee for the Democrats, or President Trump, obviously, and then just understand these speech patterns and then release a video that sounds, looks, but most importantly, feels like the candidate. And I don't think a lot of people really understand how important feeling is when you're developing something like a deep fake. It is very easy to create a deep fake, but if it doesn't seem natural, if it doesn't seem real, if it doesn't seem like, let's say the same old President Trump that we see every day at these, coronavirus press briefings as he's talking off the cuff to reporters and being combative with them, then it's going to kind of fall flat in the sense that something's off. We have something called the uncanny valley, if you're not familiar with, in artificial intelligence and robotics, and it gets to the point where as you are looking, let's say, at a robot, something is wrong. It doesn't feel like a human, even though it looks incredibly human, and this has developed and has gotten better and better and better. And so that's what a deep fake has the possibility of basically becoming. So I can make a deep fake, let's say President Trump or Obama or whoever, and if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't sound like them, it doesn't talk like them, and I'm not talking at 220 words a minute and pivoting and pivoting and pivoting, it's not going to be right. It's not going to feel right. And so I think this is something that we have to be very careful with as we are doing this, because artificial intelligence nailing those patterns, those ticks, those tells, that understanding emotionally if Trump is angry or stressed or happy or just putting on a show, as the LA Times said, that's something that we have to be concerned about, because that can be incorporated into deep fake, making it significantly more accurate. And so when we are putting out something that is basically something a candidate, or the current president didn't say, that's a very concerning thing. And so I think this is open to a lot of malfeasance. But I do think it's interesting. I do think it's amusing. And I do think in this sense it's apolitical, as it's artificial intelligence. And while they're applying it to Trump, it could be applied to anybody. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this in this nonpartisan coverage of an artificial intelligence that helps us better understand Trump's speech. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, guys.